Welcome, everybody. I'm Monsignor Ron Jameson, and I'm the rector here at St. Matthew's. I haven't been here too long. John Carr and I have known each other for just mid-'80s or so, and I've been the rector here for 29 years, but altogether for 40 years here, because I was here as a mere child, you understand. But it's really great to welcome all of you here. Here at St. Matthew's, we have welcomed different groups here from John's group, and here to celebrate, and to really bring life to our faith and to really be able to celebrate. And that's what, I'm so excited about. I told John tonight, all of you give me life. And here at the cathedral, we're getting more and more young people. We are not a parish of funerals. We have very few funerals, but plenty of baptisms and weddings, And by the way, anyone interested, just come our way. We'll be happy to help you. But tonight's a serious night too. And we are just so happy to welcome all of you, to just really, for me, to see the fact that you're here, the fact that you're interested, concerned, and that you realize there's a lot happening around us and you are needed. And with that, I also want to say that here at St. Matthew's as cathedral, it means that we are the mother church of the Archdiocese of Washington, which means we want all of you. All of you are always welcome. Come anytime. I also give a commercial, at this time. How many of you have actually been upstairs in the cathedral? Good. If anyone would like a tour, or you would like to bring your families, I'll be happy to do it because you're here tonight. So all you have to do is call me, and be happy to do it. I just love to be able to spread the word and what the cathedral means to me, and also, I hope, to so many around the Archdiocese. But I better just keep quiet, get back to my glass of Chardonnay, and Chris, you're on.
Well, thank you, Monsignor Jameson, and thank you to the initiative for helping us to host this event tonight. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to have all of you here. I'm excited to have the folks joining us online here tonight. Let's turn around and wave to all of them. Make sure that they know we love them too. All right, good. It seems like there's been a lot going on in the world lately. I mean, we had, Holy Week and Easter. Then we had this solar eclipse. How many of you watched the solar eclipse yesterday? Wonderful. I know some of you even traveled to go see it in full totality and still made it back to be with us. Some of you probably were watching the women's Final Four or the men's Final Four. Anyone watching some basketball this past weekend? All right, that was well worth the effort. And we've had this beautiful summer weather. Spring weather, right? It felt very summery today. So much happening that I almost forgot that there is an election coming up in 7 months, right? It almost blocked out of my mind for a second. It's hard to believe it's 7 months away from, I think, last Friday. And one only has to take a quick glimpse at the news to know that there is so much that those who are going to be elected will be called to respond to, right? We have wars in Ukraine and Gaza, significant violence there. Forced migration is a topic we've been talking a lot about here in our nation, the realities of hunger, a changing climate, and so many more challenges, right? No matter where we look, whether we look out our back door or we look across the ocean, it's clear that our communities, our nation, and our world need leaders with a vision that can respond to the complexities that face us right now. That's why gatherings like this one, which unite the work of organizations like the Ignatian Solidarity Network and Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, are so critical. They create space for dialogue about the needs of our world, rooted in a gospel vision that preferences the needs of vulnerable people and a vulnerable planet. And during this evening in particular, we're centering the conversation around the contributions that young people are making to our society through their public service and citizen engagement to build a more just world that our Catholic faith calls us to. So on behalf of the initiative and ISN, I want to thank you for being here tonight. And I hope that this is a space where you can find community in this amazing network of people here. It's been great to see some old faces and meet some new faces here tonight, as well as the community that's online with us. We're really grateful to them too. I hope that you find this to be a space that maybe strengthens your faith or helps you fine-tune your moral compass. And most importantly, and this is something Pope Francis talks about often, I hope you find some hope in our world tonight from our panelists. We always need hope, but in this Easter season, hope is so important to focus on, right? That's the Easter story. And to think of the hope that each of you bring in this upcoming election through your vote, through your voice, it gives me a lot of hope. I'm really grateful to have you with us for this dialogue. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna Gordon to introduce our panelists, and take it away, Anna.
Thanks, Chris. Just very quickly, thank you, Monsignor Jameson. We love being here at St. Matthew's. One of the first Salt and Light gatherings I came to was here at St. Matthew's before I worked here. So this is a home for all of us here in Washington. And like you said, a growing young adult community. So we're really glad to be a part of that. And thank you, Chris. We're so glad to be co-sponsoring tonight with Ignatian Solidarity Network. I know there are people watching online. Part of the voting is an act of love watch parties. I never thought of voting as an act of love, but I guess it is. We have over 800 people who've signed up for tonight's conversation who are here in person, and then there are dozens, if not hundreds more watching on other live streams through ISN. So thank you all for being here. There's really tremendous interest. We have some VIPs in the audience tonight. Flavio's mom is here. And a few others. We have Mary Novak, some other good friends of ours, and most of all, our regulars and our new faces who are coming here to be a part of our Salt and Light community. We hope you keep coming back. We hope you can stay afterwards for the reception to continue the conversation. But we're going to get started. My name is Anna Gordon, and I'm the program director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life here at Georgetown. And tonight we're talking about, as Chris said, a very important topic. How will young people shape the 2024 election, and how will the election shape our future? The stakes of November 2024 are pretty high. We're faced with fundamental questions and challenges about life and death, war and peace, who gets ahead and who gets left behind. We face questions about leaders' character, integrity, and capacity, as well as the protection of democracy itself. Who participates in this election will decide how our lives are and will shape our lives and the nation for decades to come. There are two groups that are likely to have a big impact on this election. One is young people. In the past, young adults have been predictably Democratic, but recent studies, like one from PRI, showed that Gen Z and younger folks may be different. They're voting differently. And another group is Catholics. Catholics have voted for the winner of the popular vote in nearly every presidential election in the last century. That's an interesting and complicated story about our diverse family of faith. But the bottom line is that Catholic voters make a difference. And so tonight we're bringing these two groups together. We're talking with young Catholics about young Catholics as we go into the election. Some of us are already involved and engaged. I think if you're tuning in here or in the room, you fall into that category. But I also think some of us are disillusioned, angry, fearful, alienated. But Catholic social thought calls us to participation and calls us to a sense of solidarity and responsibility. So the temptation can be to pull back and not engage in these hard conversations and to engage in politics. But that's not what our faith calls us to. We have three remarkable leaders here tonight who are not pulling back. They are stepping forward. We have a Democratic state senator. We have a leader who's worked as a top Republican speechwriter and senior staffer. and we have a Catholic advocate. So Flavio Bravo is a senator from the Arizona State Legislature representing District 26, and he's also serves on the board of directors for Central Arizona Shelter Services, Open Hearts Family Wellness in Phoenix, and the Keno Border Initiative in Southern Arizona. Lindsay Hayes is the president and CEO of Free the Facts, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that provides young Americans with resources to understand public policy issues and become effective voters, thought leaders, and office holders. She has served as a writer and communications consultant in the White House and in the U.S. Senate for a cabinet-level agency and on the McCain and Romney presidential campaigns. And Colin Martinez-Longmore is a communications coordinator for Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. He has served as the Advocacy Committee Chair for the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice from ISN, and he has taught classes at Georgetown University's Capital Applied Learning Lab. He's also a member of an advisory council for our Salt and Light and Latino Leader gatherings here at the Initiative, and he also was a member of the advisory council for the 2024 Catholic Partnership Summit. I'm almost done, I promise. When we get to the Q&A period, we're going to be taking questions from our audience here in person. My colleague Christian will be passing a microphone. And for those of us joining the live stream, we hope you can engage in the conversation using the hashtag YACatholicsElection24 and by tagging the Initiative and Ignatian Solidarity Network. Now I'm going to start by asking each of you a brief opening comment. And Flavio, I'll start with you. What's the most important thing to know about the role that young voters, and especially young voters of faith, will play in the 2024 presidential election?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Flavio Bravo. As I mentioned, my mother's here with me, and happy she made the flight. You know, I think when I think of the role that young voters play in the election, I actually think a lot of my wife in her first initial days in Arizona. She was born in El Estado de Mexico, and then we met later on in Mexico City. When she came to Phoenix, you know, everyone that she surrounded herself with, which was my circle, right? Because we do that sometimes. We sometimes stay in our own little bubbles. People wanted to practice their Spanish with her, right? They wanted to get to know her. They're pretty friendly, open to her, you know, story as a newcomer. And then the voter guide came in the mail, and she was at home before I arrived to the house. And the voter guide, as in most states, shares the candidates' statements of why they're running. It shares what their priorities are. And she just, her face was stone cold. And I said, what's going on? And she just, is the first time she ever heard of Kari Lake, right? It's the first time she ever heard of some of the candidates who their purpose and mission was, you know, build the border, build a wall. With Mexico, and I think she asked me, you know, where do we live? You know, I mentioned my mom because on her side we're fifth generation Arizonans, so a lot of the complicated politics in the state of Arizona I was born and raised with. You know, I always knew it wasn't what my family really reflected. They definitely always held different values, but I understood it as a complicated state. And I think what we're seeing with young voters right now is they're trying to find their role. They are quite possibly more connected than ever before with TikTok and social media, but they're also, what I find at the door is not having some of the critical face-to-face conversations. And the digital divide has only made that more challenging, and taking courses remotely and not always being able to take advantage of in-class relationship building, that's the reality. And so I just want to remind everyone that I wouldn't say they're a swing vote just yet, but if they're not engaged this election, that turnout will be low, and that'll have a poor outcome.
Thanks, Flavio. Lindsay, same question for you.
Well, I won't pretend to have any, expertise. First of all, thank you for having me. I am not a young Catholic. I am 47 years old, but I work with a lot of young people.
I think in the Catholic world, that makes you young.
Amazing. I knew there was a reason my faith was my faith. So I'm very, so thank you for having me, and thank you for having me be here. And I would say, I agree with a lot of what Flavio is saying about the digital divide and about those issues, but I think the work that I do and have been doing for the last 9 years is actually working with young voters, working with people who are 14 to 34. Again, they're all much younger than I am, and really that kind of tail end of the millennial generation, and then the Gen Z generation, the kids that are coming on up. And I guess I would say a couple of things. First, they're a huge group. I think we underestimate just how big they are and what a huge impact and potential impact they have. By 2024, they're going to be 1/5 of the eligible voting bloc. And there's 8 million more of them than there were in 2022. So they have the potential for massive impact, and they have the potential to have a huge wave of change in terms of our elections and how we conduct them and the things that we think about and the agendas that, the things that actually get put on the national and state and local agendas. I don't know that they feel their power all of the time. I think that the digital divide has really complicated that for them because they're not in spaces where they necessarily can see and understand that they are a very, very powerful force within our electoral politics. But I guess the one other thing that I would say about those voters is that I think the impact that you can be sure to have them see. Look, they're better than my generation was. I'm out of Gen X. If you go and you look at voting patterns from all the way back to 1972, they actually matched the 1972 voting patterns in 2020. They were above 50%, around 55% of those eligible voters voted. And I think that's a tremendous success story. Literally the first year I was eligible to vote, we was the lowest within that time period. So they're better than a lot of the people that came before them in terms of exercising that right, in terms of showing up and speaking out. I think the other thing to remember about them is that they are connected. I would say they have a ton of information. They're very informed, and they have a real kind of entrepreneurial, a real kind of civic-minded spirit about them. They really care about what's going on in the world. They have a lot of access to that information, and they act on it. So if you see the voting patterns in 2024, and by the way, the Tufts University, there's a center up there that did a study late last year, and they asked that voting bloc, that Gen Z kind of tail end of the millennial voting bloc, if they were likely to vote in 2024. And the numbers were astounding. It was 57% were extremely likely, another 15% were fairly likely, and that was despite the fact that they're not satisfied with the choices that they're going to see on the ballot, most likely for president. So they are highly, highly motivated. I think they're probably going to reflect the same turnout that they had in 2020, and so they have a huge impact. But the thing I like the most about this generation is that they don't view their civic responsibility as beginning and ending with voting. And I think that is probably the most important thing that you'll see on election day, is that win or lose, whether their issues kind of take the election, whether their preferred candidate shows up and wins or not, they will be back in the trenches the next day, and they will be just as engaged. They will be seeking out information, just as much as they did the day before. They don't tend to get discouraged. And you can see that even like in the choices that they have right now. They may not be happy with who's on the ballot in every place, but that hasn't made them disaffected and disengaged. In fact, I think it's done quite the opposite.
Thanks, Lindsay. That was really helpful. Colin, what's the most important thing to know about young voters of faith going into November?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you all for being here, and thank you for inviting me and having me here. I also want to give a shout out to my wife and daughter who are here today.
Yes, they deserve a shout out too.
And if I was smart, I'd end it there. But yeah, no, in a lot of the work that we do, especially at Network, we talk about building a pluralistic, multi-faith, multi-racial democracy and what that looks like. And when we talk about younger generations, millennials, Gen Zs, younger, they're more and more diverse every year, right? The most diverse generations that we have there are the ones that are coming up. So in many ways, they are that pluralistic, multi-faith, multiracial future that we're talking about. And it's not in the future, it's in the present. So when I think of the voice that young people have in this election, it's one that comes from that place of what does a society that works for everyone look like? And that's a tough question because we really have to grapple with what that means, right? But I think they're a generation that are reading the signs of the times correctly, and the signs of the times is todos, todos, todos. And I think what did James Joyce say? Catholic means here comes everyone. I think young voters are the here comes everyone vote, right? Making sure that all voices are accounted for and heard and uplifted.
Thanks. Flavio, let's come back to you. You're, as I said, an Arizona State Senator, an example of a young leader who's serving in state level politics. You've been involved in issues at the core of Catholic social teaching, like healthcare and immigration. You also told me yesterday that the first bill you proposed was just passed, which is congratulations. That's very exciting. It's going to support neurodiversity research and support for autism awareness. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Why did you decide to get involved in politics and to actually run for the Senate? And what role did your commitment to your faith and Catholic social teaching play?
Yes, thank you. Well, it started not just at the household, but it started at church. And in my family, my parents, my mother and father worked for the city with the local courts, and they wanted to enroll us at the local Jesuit elementary school. My grandfather was still very used to going to the Spanish-speaking Mass. And so to make more friends, I altar served at the English-speaking Mass of St. Francis. And then my grandfather, he would say, all right, let's go to the real church. And we would drive all the way to South Phoenix. And so I was altar serving 2 Masses every Sunday. And you hear these 2 homilies and you hear things very similar, right? You see similar and different congregations. And it's just a lot of time to think, right? You're not supposed to be speaking if you're altar serving. And then the other activity they put me in was swimming, and you can't speak when you swim, right? So a lot of time to just be calm, contemplative, thinking. But also, it was the conversations we'd have at the dinner table. And on my mother's side, her younger brother, he actually served as the right-hand man to Cesar Chavez, the great labor leader, and he died in '98. And so I grew up hearing the stories of how he was able to do so much with so little and the impact he made in Arizona with the farm worker movement as well. A lot of people don't realize that Chavez was born in Yuma, Arizona. And so when I had the opportunity to go to Loyola Chicago and get a master's at USF, I felt, what's the point of all this education if you can't apply it somewhere? And I really just wanted to get policy experience. That was my goal. I had applied to fellowships out here in DC and just nothing was working out. And so when I ended up back in the Bay Area, I could not, afford at all the cost of living. So I actually found a Catholic worker house, and it was in the Fruitville neighborhood. And basically, they said we have always welcomed Central American migrants since their civil wars in El Salvador and the conflicts in Honduras, and said as long as there's a need, right, we'll continue to try to meet that need. But if you volunteer with us, we will give you a room. And that was how I was able to afford my first semester of grad school. And it was important to study migration policy, but to also see the lived experiences of the families, to know that in one of the wealthiest parts of the country, the tech capital of the world, really, you have Google and Instagram, and just right across the Bay Bridge, right, you see stark poverty. And I thought that members of Congress should understand how these issues affect their constituents. And so then I think I probably had a more sound understanding of our policy issues and applied to work for Congressman Raul Grijalva with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. And I was here on the Hill in DC until COVID hit. And so I thought I'd be out here 10 years. I loved it. It's like going to school all over again. But when I came back to Phoenix, I think for my parents, they were wondering, you are young, but you went to Chicago, you went to the Bay Area, and then you met your fiance in Mexico City, and now you're in DC. It's like, what are you doing here? What's your plan? And to me, it really felt like it all matched perfectly. But at the same time, it was the first time in 20 years that a legislative seat was open in my home district. And the retiring legislator of 20 years, he had gone to Notre Dame, so he liked that I went to Loyola Chicago, kind of the Midwest thing, even though he was from Phoenix. And he told me, he said, bring your resume. He goes, I want to talk to you tonight. And I said, I'm happy with where I'm working. And he said, I know you're happy, but just bring your resume. And the first thing he asked my now wife, he said, do you like politics? And she said, no. She said, and for example, in Mexico, they often paint political advertisements on the walls outside your home, and her mom is the first to paint over them, So they really frown upon politics in their family and just see it as, they're corrupt, they're self-serving, and the retiring legislators said, I think that your partner here would have a different approach. And he said, it won't be easy though. A lot of people are going to jump in the race. And that's what happened. We had 4 people running for the viable seats, and it just came down to a ground game. Who was going to knock more doors? Who was going to make more calls? And in the heat of the summer, when it's 118 degrees out, and it is so hard to find volunteers, and I'll wrap up here, but I just remember that probably 6 weeks until the election, that same legislator called me and he said, "How do you think the campaign's going? 1 to 10." I said, like a 4? And he said, "Really?" And he goes, "You're working so hard." I said, "I know." I said, "But I don't have like any volunteers." I said, "Everybody I went to high school with has moved. Everybody pretty much my network, like I know the neighborhoods, I know the streets, but it's different when you're returning home." And I said, "I have my mom, I have my wife," I said, and he goes, "That's all you need." He goes, "When you're running for the first time," he goes, "people want to hear from somebody who knows you personally." And he said, it's a small team that can really make a big impact. And so it's, and our district does really have an important role when it comes to young voters. 50% of the district is under the age of 29. So it's very young. A lot of, and Halloween, you notice it. All the kids come, But I think I do encourage anybody to really consider using your talents, using your skill set, and taking that plunge to run for public office.
That's as good a sales pitch as any I've heard. That's a wonderful story. I wonder, knowing that you're a state senator and you have your constituency in Arizona, looking ahead to the national election this November, what is one thing that excites you and one thing that concerns you as we talk about young adults? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think what excites me is, and it's interesting because I'm a Democratic elected official, but the largest voting bloc in Arizona continues to be independents. And then you have Republicans, and then you have Democrats. So we are used to being in a minority. And in fact, at the state legislature, they used to call the Democratic caucus the pizza caucus, because one pizza would serve all the members. Very sad, right? But now we are 2 seats away from reaching a majority. So that is exciting. And we have, from Governor Hobbs to Secretary of State Adrian Fontes and Attorney General Mays, the formula has basically run a reasonable Democrat who will almost always win against the extreme Republican. Where we don't see that helping as much is where maps are still very much gerrymandered. So legislative districts, as Arizona and Phoenix and Maricopa County's population has boomed, people are moving to Phoenix. They're not necessarily moving to Mojave County or Kingman or some of the more rural areas, which continue to be blankets of red voters. So that what excites me is we're so close to reaching majority, and I know that the youth, by being critical thinkers, by not necessarily saying, I immediately want to be a Democrat or I immediately want to be a Republican, they are going to challenge us as elected officials to be better. And when we come to their doors, if you think in my district, there's over 64 languages spoken. So if I speak English and Spanish, there's 62 languages I don't speak. And so that means that those youth are the interpreters for their parents. And when we're knocking on the door to get their parents' vote, they want to hear from somebody who really is authentic, right? They don't want to hear just the usual pitch. And so that's definitely what excites me. I think what concerns me is right now at the national race, I know that President Biden, not only one of the most Catholic, openly Catholic presidents, but I've just noticed that on one side, you've got people like Kari Lake and Trump who just oath him, and you have others who are equally criticizing him, and it would appear that it's put him and the administration in a very difficult position for re-election, and that's just the fact. He came to Phoenix for the presidential preference election, and I had the opportunity to meet him, and for me it was an honor. Right? I shook his hands, and when I shared a photo online, just meeting the president, I got ripped apart, and it wasn't trolls online. These were my classmates from Loyola Chicago, my classmates from the Bay, and who were messaging me all night long, saying, "How can you support this man? How can you?" And I just took time, right, to try to write to each of them to say, look, like at the legislature, we spend hours every day fighting these conspiracy bills, like every day. That trickles down from Trump, and the alternative to, in my view, is just completely unacceptable. But I'm not saying, and I don't want to dismiss any criticism, right? We do need to be honest with each other to try to move the country forward. But that's I think what concerns me right now is we are only 7 months away, and I don't know that people are recognizing where we've come in these last 4 years.
Lindsay, you've had a remarkable behind-the-scenes role in some pretty important positions in politics, with 2 Republican presidential campaigns in the U.S. Senate, like I said, at a federal agency, and working as a leading speechwriter. Similar question for you. How and why did you become involved in public service?
Well, and I say this, I know a lot of young people watching here and watching at home, and I think there's a danger anytime, right, we start to give you the origin story that it seems like, oh, it all just kind of, it all fell into place. And and looking back, I think it feels that way. You kind of can see how one choice led to another choice and put you in the right. At the time, it does not at all. And so what I'm about to say, I would like to say I am leaving out, I always try to caution people against like the Instagram version of their resume, like all the beautiful, like, look at me, this is amazing, because there was a lot of like crying off camera that is not captured. Someone should do an ugly cry on Instagram. I think it would really take off. All the down moments, all the things you rejected from. But what I will say is, look, I went to Boston College. It's okay that you went to Notre Dame. I feel like we can still be friends. And although I will say, when I graduated from college, my first job, there was a guy in the cubicle next to me, and he went to Notre Dame, and I made the joke, well, it's okay, like we'll find a way to bridge the divide, and because we were very competitive in football at that point, in my mind. And in the minds of many Boston College students, including both my parents who were alumni, and he looked at me and he said, "You're not our big game. I don't know what you're talking about. It's Michigan. You don't even rank." And I thought, oh my gosh, that's the worst. It's almost worse to have your own, who you consider to be your biggest rival. They were like, "Oh yeah, you exist." So in any event, but I went to Boston College. I think, one of the things that I think is incredible, and I've noticed this in terms of my work with college students now, no matter what faith the community that the college is surrounded by, I think, institutions that have a mission that serve in higher education that serve kind of a faith based component are some of the most civic-minded students. I think you find that they're not just involved because they care about their country, although there's nothing wrong with that, but they're very driven because they feel called by their faith in order to be involved. They feel like that is an important part of their work in this world and an important way of expressing their faith and their beliefs. And that was true for me as well. The experience at BC definitely, I think, put me on a path where I really wanted to make sure that I had a career that didn't just make me money, that it made a difference. And actually, my first job out of college, at the same one where I was maligned by the Notre Dame guy, I worked for a company that shall remain nameless in a PR capacity, and I was miserable. And I was about a year in. No, that's not true. I was 6 months in. And it was much earlier than that. And I just thought to myself, their earnings came out. And I thought, I could not care less about I could not care less that they made a better widget. I know that, and there are some people that are very passionate about that. And, that's incredible. If that's what you feel called to do, that's your life's work. But it was not mine. And I thought, okay, what I care about are ideas. I care about policy. I care about leaving the world a better place than I found it. I did not want to run. Congratulations to you. I admire you greatly because I think it takes a lot of strength and a lot of bravery and courage to run, frankly, in the country, particularly in the last 10 years. I think it's become a pretty hostile place, and we are so lucky in this country that we have individuals like you that stand up and put their name on a ballot. But I knew I wasn't built for that. So I thought, well, how can I best serve? And I knew that it probably had something to do with communication. That was where my talent was. I knew how to write. I was a pretty good writer. And I went to graduate school to hide, which is what most people do when their first job out of college doesn't work. And I thought, I'm miserable. I'm going back in. I don't know why I ever came out. And I happened to be in my, during graduate school, I learned that speech writing was a job. And as a matter of fact, my parents also, they thought I was crazy because I went to graduate school and I was studying rhetoric. and my parents thought, this is like not the future. We had picked, how are you ever going to get out of the basement? And so my dad had actually bought me these books when I was home my first semester in my master's degree, and it was winter break. And he had left these books outside my bedroom door. And 2 of them were speech anthologies. And one of them was the memoir by Peggy Noonan, who was a speechwriter to President Reagan, What I Saw at the Revolution. And my dad had left me this little note that said, like, I'm not really sure what you're doing, but I think it's got something to do with this. So I thought you'd like these books. And this was his way of, I think, broaching the subject. Like, at some point, this should be probably a career, and with a paycheck. And I read it, and I read her book, and I thought, I had no idea that, I don't know how I thought speech just happened, but it wasn't that. And I thought I could probably do that. I think I could be good at that. And that kind of put me on this path. And then, but those of you who are in DC now, it's a little easier to find speechwriters now. They write books and they go to places and they hold appearances. But this was in the 90s, the late 90s. And speechwriters it was like trying to find an endangered animal somewhere, you know? I mean, it was, as it turns out, I now know Mike Gerson at the time, who came in the Bush administration, has since passed away. But Mike Gerson was actually in a Starbucks, like 2 blocks over from the White House. So I just should have gone to the Starbucks, but I didn't know that. And so I was in graduate school, and I was like, I think I want to do this at some point. And I was convinced to stay on for my first year of my PhD, and 9/11 happened in the first semester of my first year of my PhD. And I think that for those of us who lived through it, it was such a defining moment. And I think it made you ask yourself what you were doing with your life. Did it have purpose? Did it have meaning? And it accelerated, for me, the desire to be involved in some way in public service. And so writing was what I had to give. And I thought I better get on that path pretty quick. So I wound up with an internship in the White House. I was the world's oldest unpaid intern. I was 25 and engaged when I showed up at the White House, and all the other kids were like, who's the old lady that's hanging out? But I was teaching in the mornings. I would work at the White House during the day. I would go back to school in College Park at night from 7 to 10, call my mom on the way home, pick out china for the place settings for the wedding, right? And then on the weekends, I would study and grade papers. Wow. And it was a grind, but it was the best experience I could have had. And from there, again, I'm so sorry for those of you who are young, because I'm making it sound like, and then it just all happened. But from there, I wound up, it turned out I did know how to do that, and that was a skill that people found useful. I will say, just along those lines, and to kind of touch a little bit on what Flavio said, and that has been one of my great heartbreaks of my public service career, is that after 2012, I had decided that I wanted to finish my dissertation, which I did. I had decided I wanted to have a baby, which I did. And because I was going to do that, I knew I was not going to work in the 2016 election. I was going to take a presidential cycle off. I also thought we kept losing, and I thought, I don't think I'm the reason, but I'm not helping, right? I need to get out of the bubble. I need to figure out how to write things that connect with people that don't necessarily see the policy solutions the way my party does, or don't necessarily see the policy solutions in a way that they can connect with what we're saying. And then, of course, 2016, and Trump came on the stage. And one of my greatest heartbreaks of life has been, and it was very difficult, was finding that this way that I found to be of service, this way that I felt was contributing to the country, to my community, and also felt very good in terms of my faith and my spirituality, in terms of what I was doing and helping to put out in the world, that was the exact thing that really wound up being under attack, which was it's not always the policies, it's really the way we talk about them, and particularly the way we talk about the people on the other end of them. And that has been, I thought, I'll just sit out 2016, and then nope, 2016 turned into 2020, and now it's going to be again 2024, but I can't contribute to that. And I think that, so my faith, I think, has both instructed me and guided me to be part of public service. It also has guided me to not be part of public service in a political capacity, and to instead find other ways to serve, which is what I do now at this organization.
Well, I want to talk about Free the Facts just very quickly, because you say that you educate young Americans to know about the public policies that are directly impacting their lives,
Yep.
but then empower them to create solutions,
Yes.
to change and to take action. So I think for a lot of us here, we're feeling a little disillusioned, like you said, with the upcoming 2024 election. I was talking to my colleague John Carr, and he said it's like a rerun of a TV show. We've already seen Biden and Trump before, and I don't think any of us really want that. And
Didn't have high ratings last time, so
Yeah.
why did we reboot it?
Why is it being rerun? Yeah, but to those who feel alienated by Trump, by Biden, or by both candidates, who don't think either candidate really fits with their values and with how they want to vote, especially for young people of faith, what would you say to them?
So I would say that the first thing that I would say is, so our organization, which we founded in the midst of 2016, one would think not a great time to show up on college campuses and say, hey, let's talk about some controversial public policies, right, in the midst of that election. But it actually, we are unbiased, and we are nonpartisan. So we serve two missions. We're dual mission. So on the educational side, our goal is merely to make sure that people have reliable information about the policies and programs that are going to impact them, and that they're going to be called on either as leaders or voters to weigh in on over the course of their lives. And we focus on individuals 14 to 35. So we're looking at things like on the mandatory side of the budget that we don't talk about very often, but that cohort is going to be asked to vote on these things, like Medicare, like Social Security, like Medicaid, right? We're looking at those programs, and we feel really strongly about those because those touch people's lives in very tangible ways. And what we do in those programs is going to be very impactful for people. And so what we're trying to do is provide reliable information so that people can be better informed. We have a policy advisory board. It has people on the left and on the right. So it's not just me sitting around in my basement going, what would be good to know about Social Security, right? We have experts involved, and we require 100% consensus from individuals on the left and the right who weigh in on our curriculum, that it's a fair articulation of the program, its history, the problems, and the trade-offs in any policy solutions. So we're trying to create this educational space where people can get reliable information. And we always say to people, look, we don't tell you how to think, we just make sure you can. It's not if I wanted to be an advocate, I'd go back into the partisan realm. I'm here to make sure that people can make good decisions, right, that are in accordance with their values and their political affiliations, whatever those may be. On the leadership side, we are trying to empower a smaller subset of individuals who are called to public service, and we are trying to encourage people who are in Gen Z or young millennials who feel disillusioned and feel disaffected to roll up their sleeves and get in and to make a difference and to run for office or to work as a staffer. And what I always say to them is, you can have a tremendous impact. I mean, one person running, look at what Flavio is saying. I mean, the impact, right, within his community and the things that he's doing with just one seat. Now imagine if there were 20 of him or 30 of him, right? Now imagine if there were 20 or 30 of him and they were on both sides of the aisle and they were working together cooperatively to figure out how to use public policy to do the maximum amount of good for the most people, right? And that is the focus that we try to teach at Free the Facts, which is it's a different kind of leadership. It's a different kind of way of working. Look, politics are always fraught. But our politics didn't always look like this. I know that because when I got into our politics and I started my political career, 25, 27 years ago, it didn't look like this. I worked my first job in the U.S. Senate. I worked for a U.S. senator who was a Republican, but he considered his best friend in life, a man he called his brother, was the U.S. senator from Hawaii who was a Democrat. The two of them disagreed on a lot of stuff, but they loved each other and they respected one another. And you know what? That love and respect drove a lot of compromises that I think surprised both of them. And that is not a bad thing. That we live in a pluralistic society. We're not supposed to get everything we want. It's not supposed to be, it's not supposed to be winner take all. That's not, and then whoever wins forces everybody else to go along with it. We're going to have to figure out as a community how we get this work done. And so that I view myself, people say, oh, are you working for a candidate this cycle? And I say, I'm working for like 400 of them. You just haven't met them yet, right? So I'm working for all of these candidates that I hope they're in our leadership programs now. We train them, we work with them, we bring them across the country, we convene them, we help them network. They're from the left, they're from the right. A lot of them are students of faith. They're very devout. One of our biggest chapters is actually at BYU, right? So we're bringing people in and allowing them to have that conversation and get to know one another. And my hope is we're setting up the climate so that people can reach across the aisle and work together to do positive things for one another.
That's inspiring. What you were saying just now reminded me, I think what our Catholic faith calls us to is to not tell people, how to vote. The Catholic Church doesn't tell people how to vote, but to vote their conscience on each issue and to really discern on that. So that's wonderful. Colin, you've worked with young people in various capacities. You have a history with youth ministry out in California, and then grassroots mobilization, and now you're here doing communications for a network here in DC. What are some of the things that you see moving young voters to engage more meaningfully in politics? We heard some examples from Lindsay, but tell us what it's been like in your world, and what are the challenges that prevent that engagement?
Yeah, I think it's just the realization that, whether we want to or not, our personal lives are always going to be political. That the systems that we're working with, that we're trying to navigate our way through, and then especially even as young people, are always going to be political. And oftentimes the decisions that rule our lives and to decide what we can accomplish, how far we can go, what keeps us back, are made by folks that aren't us at times, right? When I was working in youth ministry, working with seeing young people that are trying to navigate systems that are just way bigger than them. They have no business navigating that, right? If you have 7 people living in a 3-bedroom house, that is a political decision. That is a political situation that you're living in, that other people have made a decision for you in how that neighborhood was zoned. There are in RCIA classes I would do in juvenile hall, and these students are trying to navigate the criminal legal system on their own, seemingly, right, without support from family. So a lot of the times our lives are political, whether we see it or not. And I think when folks connect that personal, that deep story that they have, that they know moves them, and they can connect that to the community and how the community is affected by it. It ignites something big, right? When you find that place of self-interest where the thing that moves you is the thing that moves the community, and then a movement can be created sustainably as well. I think of in 2022, we were doing our Pope Francis voter tour, where we're going around the country trying to encourage folks to be multi-issue voters, right? And as we're doing that, we're stopping by in different places. I am not loyal to my barbers at all, so I needed a haircut, and I went to some barber that I found. I looked up on Instagram, barber, Akron, Ohio. Okay, that's my spot. So I went to a place, and obviously, I walk in, and I'm clearly not a regular. I'm clear, and they're not getting very much business anyway. So they're like, "Who are you?" First of all. And I'm just here to get a haircut. So I sit down, they're like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm coming from DC." And they put 2 and 2 together. It's 2022, it's the midterms. You say you're from DC. So the first question just very much like, "So who are you with?" Felt like I was like walking into a gang standoff or something. And I was like, "Who am I with?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm explaining it's Network Lobby. We're founded by Catholic sisters. We're inspired by Catholic sisters. We try to live out Catholic social justice." I was like, "So I'm with the sisters." Like, I don't know what you're talking about, but and so we're having those conversations, and I'm like, well, and really we're just here to hear what are the issues that people care about that ignite them, right? And some of those policies are about housing, they're about healthcare, they're about food policies, taxes. But before I can even get there, I say healthcare, and my barber stops and he says, "Healthcare." He's like, "Does that include insulin?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "Well, for insulin, I have to, the cost of insulin keeps going up, and I have to choose whether I'm going to pay for insulin or rent out my chair here at the barbershop, because I can't do both of those. But then I'm stuck, because if I can't make money by renting out my chair for the month, how am I going to pay for that insulin?" Right. And when you get to that moment of self-interest, where the deep story that motivates you or that motivates your family can connect with the story that motivates your entire community or others around you, I think it ignites something that then you see young people just taking off, and they don't need guide rails, they don't need any movements, and they're able to go and I don't really like the term when people say like, let young people go and make a mess of things, because that that lets the older people off the hook, as if the current status quo is not a mess already, right? Yeah. And but I think it's really connecting folks to that personal side of it, where they recognize that everything in their life is going to be political because of the different systems that they have to navigate through that are so much bigger than just an individual act of charity, when something like justice is really needed.
Why are you involved in this work of connecting faith and politics? Why do you work at Network? What inspires you to stay involved? And how do you work to ensure that your faith shapes your politics rather than your politics shaping your faith?
That's so good. There was a quote that I heard from this sermon I heard on a podcast. It was saying, if the God you worship is for everything you're for and against everything you're against, you're probably worshiping yourself. And right, you're just like, oof, all right. But for me, I think the motivator oftentimes, especially when things are just difficult or not moving, or the rhetoric just gets so like outlandish and ridiculous and hurtful, it's just remembering like the grit of previous generations. I think Pope Francis hit right on the head when he talks about the future being intergenerational as well. And when I recognize that many of the benefits that I live in my life didn't come, I wasn't just born, into it from nothing, that it came from the hard work, from the sweat, from the blood of generations before me, that many of them never got to see the benefit of that as well. The fact that when our daughter was born, I was able to take time off for parental leave. That wasn't something that was a given, right? That was something that many people had to really put in the energy, the effort for, that many people didn't see the fruition of that. They're the builders of a future, not their own. And that to me, when I think of that, it's just, call it Catholic guilt or whatever, but I'm just like, I was given so much. How can I just receive that and then leave it? How do I not move it forward for the next generation? Recognizing that it's their world as well. So for me, I always keep in mind that intergenerational aspect of how much previous generations have worked and sacrificed and dealt with, much more difficult stuff than probably I've currently dealt with, right? So their courage gives me courage as well.
I always say one of my favorite parts of my personal faith life is my church, my community, because it's the only time every week where I really hang out with people of all ages and all backgrounds, and we form our groups and we meet with people we have similar interests to, but church broadens that, and that's something I love about our faith. I can't believe the time has gone by so quickly. I had so many other brilliantly worded questions for you all, but I think it's time for my colleague to pass the microphone, and we're going to take some questions from the folks here in the audience. So if you have a question, please introduce yourself and phrase your question in the form of a question. To quote my colleague, John Carr. We got one right back here. Stand up.
Oh, okay. I was like, do I stand? I don't know. Hi, I'm Laura. I live here in DC. And a question I have just that's been on my mind lately as both a Catholic and someone who cares about social issues and public policy is the document that came out from the Vatican on human dignity. And I found things in it that I found personally very troubling, especially things about surrogacy and for transgender individuals. I, in my work, see a lot of legislation that is especially targeted at youth, and you hear a lot how harmful that stuff can be to these children. And I think my question, I guess, is just how do you, when you're looking kind of at public policy and you're trying to look at your faith to form that, but then you see stuff coming out in the church that bothers you or that makes your heart kind of constrict a little bit. How do you look at that and try to see how this is both impacting the church and maybe Catholic voters and trying to have these conversations that are hard within the church when there's majorly affecting public policy?
Colleen, you want to give a quick response? Give him the easy one. No, thank you for your question.
Yeah, no, an important question. So thank you for bringing that into this space. I'm always just working with Catholic sisters. I'm just always inspired by Catholic sisters because the work that they do is so gospel rooted, and the work oftentimes that has them bumping up against other folks who you would think would have their back as well in that, right? Saying, hey, if we're here to support those that are being marginalized, that are, by no fault of their own being persecuted or pushed off to the side or cast aside in that throwaway culture that Pope Francis talks about. We should have the support of the institution if that's the case. And oftentimes there are moments where sisters won't find that. And in the history of Network, there's been those moments. But the persistence of Catholic sisters to know that the Spirit is moving them in that place, that regardless of any external things that may be happening, that when you know you're pursuing gospel justice, you're not going to make a lot of friends sometimes. Sometimes you'll have moments of tension that are hurtful and harmful. But being able to persist through that and being like, you know what, I know that this is where the Spirit is calling me to because I see the life from the work that I'm doing here. Because I know that persisting in this is going to help those that maybe in this moment are having their voices pulled away, intentionally so, right? So just the fact of being able to see the witness of certain Catholic sisters who I don't think sisters get enough due in our church.
Can we clap for Catholic sisters? Yeah.
But they approach it fearlessly, and they approach it consistently, and they do it with a heart of joy. They do it with humor, and they do it while never leaving the side of those who need them. And that's something that when I see that, I'm like, I need to do that as well. I need to be in that space as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Another question? Got one up front here.
Good evening, Christian. My question is, the reality for young adults is that we're just as split as the rest of the country. There's a phrase that I dislike, but I'll use it for the sake of, clarity, the rad trads. Young people are all not progressive and all not welcoming. So how do we continue to facilitate? Georgetown is a great microcosm of dialogue, but what about the rest of the United States and conservative dioceses and parishes and college campuses? Having dialogue between these conservative and progressive Catholic thoughts. And then what advice would you give us here in the audience, but then also those who are online who are involved in all of this?
Well, I think both of those questions, I think actually, your question and the previous question, I think actually point to what is a real role that young people of faith can play. Look, the election is a snapshot. It's a moment. It's, it'll get people in a room, and it's great for us to talk about it and anticipate it and look at it. But it is literally one moment. It is literally one snapshot in time. The much more important question is about our civic life and about how we all work and communicate and build community together. And I think that there's a real question here, like this work that I've seen that young people of faith in terms of playing into that civic life, into that broader political conversation and policy conversation, regardless of where they fall on those sides of the issues, is that they're more prepared to do that because they understand what it is to be part of community. And that being part of community does not mean that everyone within your community thinks exactly like you or agrees, but that you approach that community and disagreements with that community with a generosity of spirit, which is that I do not assume bad things about you. I do not assume that you are a bad person or that you are, simply because you have arrived at a different place in terms of your journey and thinking about these issues. And so I guess what I would say is, I've actually, in a lot of ways, approached my relationship to the Republican Party in ways that I've approached my meaningful relationship with the Catholic Church, which is, these are institutions that I'm a part of, and they are motivated by values that I share. That does not mean that they're always perfect. It doesn't mean that I agree with every document, whether it be, necessarily, something that comes out, and this is kind of dicey. I don't, mean to challenge people, but, it sounds like, there's a document that comes out of the Vatican and you read through it and you go, I don't know, this doesn't hit me exactly right? That is a very powerful and actually meaningful thing to be in communication with your own institution and thinking deeply about how the institution that you're a part of lives and fulfills and delivers on those values that you're supposed to share. And I think it's really healthy for that dialogue to happen. And this is the reason I haven't left the Republican Party, by the way. That's kind of like I don't mean the pun, but I'm going to use it. The elephant in the room is I'm the only one on this panel who is a Republican. I will say I'm a Republican from Massachusetts. So you had the pizza caucus, we had the minivan caucus. I worked for a state senator who's the Senate minority leader, and my mother was so proud. She was like, he's in leadership. And I told him, I was in high school, and I told him, and he said to me, we can literally caucus in my wife's minivan. Like, you should not be that proud. So I know what it's like to really be, and I had to think very deeply because I was in a place where I was very much, I had to think very deeply about my political identity and affiliation, and I struggled with that my whole life. And I view myself as being part of an institution, and if I leave, right? If I disengage from that community, if I'm not part of that conversation, then who will give voice to that perspective? Who will move that institution forward? Who will help that institution to think about the documents, whether it be the Republican Party and the platform, right, that it puts forth, the speeches that people give, the documents, the bills they write? Who's there to push and say, are you sure that's right? Is that really what you want to say? Is that really how we feel like we ought to be exercising, fulfilling, or communicating these values? And I think that's the answer. The answer is that students of faith, whether they be at Georgetown or Boston College or Notre Dame or BYU, right, you can include a lot of schools, they are parts of community and they understand what it is to navigate those difficult conversations, to look at somebody with a generosity of spirit, say, hey, we believe, I know in your heart of hearts you are a good person. We share the same values. Think about how you think those values ought to be operationalized. Think about the policies that those values are calling you to support. Is that the right one? And I think that kind of loving dialogue is important for us to have with one another, and it's important for us to have with our institutions, no matter what we're a part of, and it's important that we're there. And I see students of faith, because it's that deliberative democracy muscle. They exercise it. They exercise it within their communities. And I think they can be doing that for the country. And I think that would be huge in terms of leadership.
Flavio.
Just wanted to add, for me personally, it has been very difficult. I think when I got this invite, I screenshotted it and I sent it to my brother-in-law because he served on the school board for the local public elementary school for 12 years. And I told him, I said, how come we can't have this conversation in Phoenix? Like last year, I gave the keynote at Loyola Chicago. USF brought me out. When we have Catholic Schools Day at the Capitol, they don't invite Democrats. And for the last 2 years, and I always show up and I say, hi everybody, and I remind them that I went to these schools, right, and that I carry this education with great pride, and that and it is just tough. That's all I can say. And even when I talk to, I'll invite former teachers I used to teach with at the Brophy, the Jesuit Prep, and I'll invite them to the state capitol. And I'll say, bring your students, I can show them. And one of them said, we always take students to the U.S. Capitol. We've never even been to the state capitol. And I said, well, now you have an alum here, make the most of it. But another reason, one thing I want to say is a lot of times you'll never really find, I think, the role model that you're looking for. Like you have to be that role model. And when I thought the election was looking good, I reached out to the Kino Border Initiative in Nogales because I felt if I had won the election, I was going to be asked to serve in different capacities. And I told them, I said, this is an organization I want to serve with, an organization that I would love to leverage any resources from the state to help Kino Border Initiative. And I think that you have to find a way because it's not going to come towards you. And my very first day that I served in the Senate, when I was appointed after being elected to the House, was when we were to vote on the state budget. And so it was one of the most important votes you're going to take. And when I showed up, there was an older gentleman who'd served for 20 plus years. And he looked at me and he said, Flavio, do you consider yourself a man of faith? And I said, well, yes, of course I do. And he went on to tell me about his 30 grandchildren and what that meant for him. And how many kids do you have? And I said, well, no, none right now, but it's nice to meet you, sir. And I just think it looks different to everybody, right? What does it mean to be a person of faith? What does it mean to care, about moving your community forward? And again, you have to be your own role model, I think.
Can I say something real quick on that as well?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I always feel like, especially during an election year, I always tell young people, but honestly, anyone, I'm like, pay attention when you're scrolling and when you're reading something, the headlines that you read, how they make you feel. Because if you feel pissed off, if you feel distraught, if you feel scared, if you feel just like checked out, like I'm tuning out, this is too much, that was by design, right? And oftentimes the most divisive voices, the most insane messaging, the most unserious policy solutions come out during a time like this. One, to agitate an extreme base, right? But there's also a reason behind it, and it's to make anyone in the middle that feels sane, that feels like, I'm more of an independent, I'm not sure where I'm at, this and that. But if this is the conversation, I'm out. I'm just not gonna, this is great, this is the same as always, I'm not even gonna do it then. And it serves two purposes. to disenfranchise those that are in the middle, that care, those people of faith that are like, no, I believe these things, but if this is what's out there, I'm not going to participate in that. So I think it's always important as well to recognize that we're not echoing a message that is agitating a base and while disenfranchising those in the middle, because those that are waiting and wanting to show their care, to show that a gospel love as well, are there. And those messages are real because there are serious issues that require serious solutions. And those are going to happen in something that's bigger than a tweet, right? So I think it's always remembering that as well during that time, that if you're reading something that's crazy and it sounds like, whoa, am I really that far away from my brother or sister? Am I really that far away from my neighbor? That's a feeling that someone wanted you to feel. And there's a reason for that. So just keep your eyes open.
Little PSA there. That's great. We're at time, unfortunately. I know there's still more questions for the folks here, and I'm sure some online as well. We'll continue the conversation in the back of the room over some food and drink. But before we close, I just want to ask everyone for a single word or phrase to leave us with, nice and short. But what's an action step that people can take here in the room or online to build what Pope Francis calls a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good? So what's one concrete thing that people can do? We'll just go down the line.
Sure, I think listen.
Listen?
The thought just comes is todos. It's recognizing it's everyone.
I'll give you 3 words. Todos, todos, todos. Good.
I feel like I'm like in 3rd grade again. I'm like, you stole my, because I think listen, but I agree.
Yep.
I think listening, especially to people who have experiences that are different than yours, right, is very important.
Well, this has just been amazing. Join me in thanking our panel. I do just want to say, first of all, thank you to Ignatian Solidarity Network for co-sponsoring this. It's just been a great night. Thank you, Chris, and everyone at the ISN team who put this together with us. It's just been a great experience. I just want to preview, we have a upcoming Latino leader gathering in May that I wanted to highlight that's going to be talking about environmental justice, climate change, and Latino lives. And we'll have details coming in the coming days posted on our website, and that'll be a really wonderful conversation. And then later in June, we're going to be holding hopefully 2 public dialogues, one around the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and one on the vocation of journalists in this tough time. So please visit our website for details there. This discussion will be recorded and posted on our website, as well as the Ignatian Solidarity Network's website. So please check that out later. Thank you, Monsignor Jameson, and St. Matthew's Cathedral for hosting us in this beautiful space. And as always, thanks to my wonderful colleagues, our director, Kim Daniels, our founder, John Carr, Kim Mazik, our associate director, and Christian Sunan, our projects manager. Thank you all for joining us, both here at the Cathedral and online. And let's just thank our panel one more time.